Hey, welcome to another Bible study here at Influence Church. We've just completed the book of Leviticus, and we thought getting into the book of Leviticus that it might have been a boring book. However, we found out that it was actually really exciting, and we learned a lot. We were challenged a lot. We touched on a lot of controversial topics in the book of Leviticus, and we've covered that book. So if you missed out on any of those previous studies, what you can do is you can go to our YouTube channel, you can click on the videos tab, and you can rewatch any of our previous studies. As a matter of fact, if you have not done it as yet, hit that share button and hit that subscribe button. So we're getting into a new book today, and we're moving from the book of Leviticus to the next book chronologically, and that book is the book of Numbers. That's correct. If you guessed the book of Numbers, that is the book that we are moving into today. And as this is an introduction into the book of Numbers, we're going to cover the overview of the book of Numbers. We're going to look at some major themes that we see in some significant places in the book of Numbers. So I'm going to give you a fair warning. Today's study is going to have a lot of information coming at you. So be prepared to consume information. All right. Grab your notebook so that you can take some notes, your Bible so that you can follow along. So like I've said to you before, in order for us to really understand a passage of scripture or a book that we read in the Bible, we must study a few things. For example, the context, the biblical background, the historical background, the audience in which it was written to, the date it was written. So in this first study, we're going to set up the premise for our following studies as we look at the book of Numbers. We're going to look at the context in which this book has been written from and who it was written to originally, and then we're going to, as we build in our further studies, see how that is transferable now to us in our modern day culture. So an introduction into the book of Numbers. Now I want you to know that this book, the book of Numbers, seeks to give us historical background on the nation of Israel as they journeyed from being in slavery in Egypt through the wilderness into the promised land. So when we looked at the previous book, the book of Leviticus, they were in the wilderness and they were receiving the law. When we looked at the book of Exodus, they had come out of Egypt, right? And now when we are looking at the book of Numbers, we are looking really at that gap between where they are out of Egypt, but they haven't really entered into the promised land. They're in the wilderness for these 40 years, and we're going to journey with them through the wilderness and see what happens in that process. And it's quite interesting what happens during those 40 years, all right? So that is where we're going to start today with just our background into the book of Numbers. And if you're wondering why is it called the book of Numbers, that's because the book of Numbers records a lot of the significant events that happened through the wilderness period, and it is a place where they conducted the surveys and census, calculating the number of people, the number that were ready to fight in battle. So that's why they get this name Numbers. Now I know a lot of preachers or Bible teachers might use this joke that or is often used as a Christian pickup line. I'm reading the book of Numbers, but I don't see your number in it. But I'm not going to say that joke today in this Bible study. I promise I'm not going to say that joke. All right. So the purpose of the book of Numbers is not to get someone's number, but it is to tell the story of how Israel prepared to enter into the promised land and how they sinned and they were punished and how they were prepared again to enter into the promised land, right? So this is the main purpose of the book of Numbers. I want you to look at the book of Numbers as a historical book. Now, when you read the Bible, you're not reading a fairy tale, you're not reading a fictional novel, you are reading history. And as we go through the book of Numbers, you're going to be getting a lot of history into the nation of Israel, where they came from. Now, while for you and I as Gentiles, if you're not Jewish, maybe you're Jewish and you're joining on, for you and I who are Gentiles, it may seem as though this is not relevant to us because it's not our immediate history historically in terms of our lineage and where our family came from. However, it is our spiritual history. And that is why I want you to pay attention as we journey through the book of Numbers to understand spiritually where you've come from, where the message of Jesus has come from, where it started to where it is now. Because the more you understand history, is the more you would appreciate the blessings that you currently enjoy, right? So as a Christian, I think it's very important to understand biblical history. I know a lot of people don't like history and they find it to be a little boring. For me, I love history because history helps me to know and to appreciate my present, right? And there's a famous quote by George Santayana. Santayana. Probably still got that wrong. But here's what George says, right? It says, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think this is important because as we journey through the book of Numbers, we would see that oftentimes the Israelites, they forgot where they came from, what God did for them in Egypt, and they kept repeating and going back into past patterns. And that's why it took them so long to come out of the wilderness. And just as for them, they did not learn from history, or it took them a while to learn from it, it's important for us to quickly learn from history, especially our spiritual history, so that we don't repeat in the same pattern, all right? So we're starting with our overview. Who wrote the book of Numbers? Now, if you were paying attention, I would have said in our first study when we covered Genesis that the first 5 books of the Bible is written by, drum roll, Moses. That's correct, right? So Moses is the author of the book of Numbers, and the audience, again, just like our previous 3 books, the first 3 books that we covered in the Bible, the audience is the people of Israel. This is the original audience it is written to. The average date in which biblical scholars believe that the book of Numbers was written is between 1450 to 1410 BC. Now, if you're thinking, how come it is written between a higher number and a smaller number? Isn't it supposed to be between like 2000 to 2005? Remember, we're talking BC. BC counts down instead of counting up, right? So AD, where we live in that timeline, we count up 2001, 2002, 2003. BC, they count down because they're counting from when Jesus lived. They're counting from that point going back into history. So BC is before Christ and AD is annual domination, or more commonly or easily understood as after Christ, right? So some key people that we're going to see in the book of Numbers. Now, these key personas, we're not going to talk about them much today, but you're going to see them as we journey through the book of Numbers. And it's important to understand these characters, these biblical characters. So we're going to see Moses, we're going to see Aaron, we're going to see Miriam, we're going to see Joshua, we're going to see Caleb, Eleazar, Korah, and Balaam, right? So these are some of the key people we're going to see. Some of the key places that the nation of Israel are going to be in during the book of Numbers is Mount Sinai, the promised land, because that's where they're going, or as the actual name of the space would be, the Canaan, Kadesh, Mount Hor, and the plains of Moab, right? So I'm now going to give you a blueprint. I gave you the overview of who wrote the book, the background behind it, but I'm going to kind of give you a blueprint. So I'm going to draw out for you what the entire book of Numbers is going to look like. So the main themes that happens throughout the book of Numbers, right? Now, the book of Numbers has 36 chapters in total. So I'm going to break up these 36 chapters into the main things that happen during certain groups of chapters, right? So from chapters 1 to 10, this is the main thing that happens. 10 to 11, this is the main thing that happens, right? So a general blueprint so that you understand, or you have an overview, an oversight of a blueprint, so to speak. That's why we call it a blueprint of what it looks like, what the entire book of Numbers look like. So even if you probably fall asleep some part in between reading through the book of Numbers, which is what you're going to be doing as we are studying, you're going to be reading it on your own at home. Even if you kind of lose track certain places, you have this blueprint to help you along in understanding the entirety of the book of Numbers, what it's about. So firstly, the book of Numbers starts off with the nation of Israel preparing for the journey. What journey? The journey to get to Canaan. They've left Egypt and now they're going to Canaan. They're going through the wilderness, right? So this is from chapter 1 roughly until chapter 10. And a few things happen in these first 10 chapters. They have the first census of the nation. So Moses gathers all the people together and he counts them out, right? Now he's counting them out, he's numbering them, and he's numbering them to see and get an idea of who he has, how many people he has. And this is the reason for the first census, right? They do the role of the Levites. Now, we did cover the role of the Levites when we look at the book of Exodus, and we did our study on the high priest, right? So the role of the Levites, they were responsible for the priestly duties. Then we see the purity of the camp, where God calls the nation of Israel to righteousness. And we cover a lot of that in the book of Leviticus. So the book of Leviticus actually happens in the book of Numbers, if that makes sense. Like the events or the guidelines or the laws that were given in the book of Leviticus happens in the book of Numbers, because Numbers actually gives us the timeline of the events that happens from the moment that they leave Egypt, right? Then we have them receiving guidance for the journey. The next thing that happens is from chapter 10 till roughly chapter 14 is the first time they approach the promised land. Now, they approach the promised land 2 times. The first time, they decided that they should not go in, and that leads them to circling the wilderness for 40 years, until the second time, when they come back around, then they decide, okay, let's go into the promised land this time, right? So the first time, the people complain. They say that there are giants in the land. They send out 10 spies. 2 come back and say, we can do it, as Joshua and Caleb. The other 8 says, no, we can't do this. These giants are too big. We're not strong enough. We're not fast enough. We're not able to defeat these giants, right? So the people complain. Miriam and Aaron opposes Moses. So this is kind of a sibling conflict right here, but it has a larger effect because it affects the entire nation of Israel, right? So Miriam and Aaron, I said sibling conflict because they are related, not because the conflict was due to sibling rivalry, right? So it had nothing to do with who was inheriting their mother or father's land, right? That wasn't the case. But the brother, Moses' brother and sister opposed Moses, and you are going to see more details into that as you read through the book of Numbers. I'm not going to go in much in details because this is the blueprint that we're looking at today. And then the spies incite rebellion, right? So a major theme that we're going to see happening is rebellion. And I'm definitely going to tackle that topic later on in this study when we look at the spirit of rebellion, right? What caused that rebellion? What was the effects of that rebellion? What was the fallout? What was the hurt that occurred? How did the healing happen as well from that rebellion? Because that was like a major rebellion that occurred with the nation of Israel while they were in the wilderness, right? Next, we have they are wandering in the wilderness. So they forfeit going into the promised land, and for 40 years they go around in circles and circles, wandering in the wilderness. This is from chapters 15 through chapters 21. So here they get additional regulations. They have many leaders that rebel against Moses. They have duties of the priests and the Levites are further outlined. And as well, we see that the old generation that didn't want to go into the promised land, they were afraid, they didn't have faith in God, they die out, and a new generation arises. And this new generation is who is actually going to enter into the promised land. The next theme that we see is roughly between chapters 22 to chapters 36. Now remember, there's 36 chapters in total. And this is their second approach to the promised land. This time they are going to get in, and we find some important things happening. There's a story of Balaam. Now, we said Balaam is a key character in the book of Numbers, so we're going to find out a little bit more about this guy. Then we see the second census of the nation. Or the second census, they're counting the people that are able to fight in battle, right? Because they're going into the land, the promised land, Canaan. They're going to overthrow the people that live there, the Perizzites, Hebrizites, Jebusites, whoever, right? They're going to overthrow them and take over the land of Canaan. They receive instructions concerning offerings, which we did talk about when we looked at the book of Leviticus. We talked about the different types of offerings. There's vengeance on the Midianites. So there's a battle that goes on between the Midianites and the Israelites. Then there is the Trans-Jordan tribes. And finally, they camp out on the plains of Moab just before entering into the promised land. So that is the general outline of the book of Numbers, right? We journeyed through all 36 chapters. We're going to actually read in details and actually do some studies in details, pull out some main theological areas, see where our faith intersects with our with the way that we live. And we're going to be able to pull out studies from that as we go through the book of Numbers, right? Now, before we kind of come to the end of this study, yeah, we're almost to the end, not so much to the end, but almost to the end. Like I said, there's a lot of details in this study. I want to just look at some key places in the book of Numbers. Now, remember what I told you. I want you to approach the book of Numbers as historical data. That being said, these areas that you're going to look at is actual geographical landmarks, right? So this is not fictional places that we're talking about. It's not metaphorical. This is real places that exist currently in our world, in Israel, in that Middle Eastern area. So I want you to understand, as they journeyed through the wilderness, some of the significant places that they stopped off in, and what happened in these specific places. So the first place that they were in was the Mount of Sinai. And it says that Numbers begins at the Mount of Sinai in the wilderness of Sinai, with Moses taking the census of the men eligible for battle, right? So the first census, he's taking the men eligible for battle. So I stand corrected. I did say that the first census was him just counting, and the second one was for battle. But I stand corrected here. The first census was actually where he counted them out to know who is ready and who is able to fight, right? So as the battle preparations began, the people also prepared for spiritual battle that they would face. Now, the spiritual battle that they would face is that when they entered into Canaan, there would be a lot of people there that were of pagan religions and would have worshipped false gods and have sinful lifestyles, and God was preparing them to be set apart from these people so that when they enter into the promised land, they don't go into the promised land, forget about God, and return to serving idols, right? So they were preparing both for physical battle and for spiritual battle. The next place that they end up in is the wilderness of Paran, right? After a full year at Mount Sinai, the Israelites broke camp and began their march towards the promised land by moving into the wilderness of Paran. From there, one leader from each tribe was sent to spy out the new land. After 40 days, they returned, and all but Joshua and Caleb were too afraid to enter. So this is where the 12 spies go out. Now we get a little more information. The 12 spies are actually a leader from each of the tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel. And only two of them come back and give a good report. That is Joshua and Caleb. And Joshua and Caleb are going to be very significant to the nation of Israel moving forward, right? So they're not just by the way character that is tossed in here, two of the 12 spies, but they are significant biblical characters moving forward through the book of Numbers, and then as we move into First Kings and First Samuel and Second Samuel. Am I saying that correct? Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. Yeah, probably a little bit Deuteronomy into First Samuel, Second Samuel, right? Anyhow, so after this happens in the wilderness of Paran, we have Kadesh, right? That's the next place that they go to. And with the years of wandering nearing an end, it says the Israelites set their sights once again on the promised land. Kadesh was the oasis where they spent most of their wilderness years. Miriam died there. Miriam was the sister of Moses. Kadesh is where Moses, in anger, struck the rock which kept him from entering into the promised land. So while it was a good place that they rested in, it was also that place where they grumbled and they complained, and it caused Moses, out of anger, to strike a rock when God told Moses to speak to the rock so that water will flow out. And because of his disobedience, Moses does not get to enter into the promised land. Now, that is some major stuff to unpack there, but we are going to look at it in future studies, right? So the next place we look at is Arad. Arad, here, when the king of Arad heard that Israel was on the move, he attacked, but was soundly defeated, and Moses led the people southward, eastward, around the Dead Sea, right? So again, this is another place where a battle occurred. Then we have Edom. Israel wanted to go through Edom, but the king of Edom refused passage, and instead they had to travel around Edom, and they became very discouraged because they had to go around. It was a longer journey. They complained, and here is where God sent poisonous snakes, and the only way for them to be healed from being bitten by this poisonous snake was for them to look at a serpent that was placed on a bronze staff. And that one is very prophetic, as well as it is a symbol that we use right now in our healthcare system. So definitely we want to look some more into that when we get there into chapters 21 of the book of Numbers, right? The next place that we have is Amon. And King Sihon of the Amorites, he refused Israel passage again, and instead he attacked them. Israel defeated his armies and conquered the territories as far as the border of Amon. That's in other place that we see. The next place that we see is Bashan. So here Moses sent spies into Bashan. King Og attacked him, but he was also defeated as well. Next, we have the plains of Moab, and the people camped on the plains of Moab, east of the Jordan River, across from Jericho. They were on the verge of entering into the promised land. So here we see they're almost into the promised land, right? We are at chapter 22 now of the book of Numbers. The next place that we see, just two more places left, is Moab. Here King Balak of Moab, terrified of the Israelites, called upon the famous sorcerer Balaam. Now remember, we said we're going to find out some more about this guy Balaam. So Balaam was a sorcerer, and the king of Moab called upon him to put a curse on the nation of Israel from above the mountain where they were camping out. But instead, somehow, and we're going to actually read some more about in chapter 22 of the book of Numbers, somehow God caused this same sorcerer who meant to put a curse on the nation of Israel to actually put a blessing upon them. And the last key place is Gilead. And here the tribes of Reuben and Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh decided to settle in the fertile country of Gilead, east of the Jordan River, because it was good land for their sheep. But first they promised to help the other tribes conquer the land west of the Jordan River. So these are the key places, right? I know it's heavy when it comes to detail, when it comes to information. So I know it's going to take you maybe a little time to kind of just let this sink in. Maybe you might want to rewatch this study. Definitely you want to take some notes. It's important to know this. Like I said, this is history. This is your spiritual history. And we've kind of set the framework now for the rest of the book of Numbers. We've understood the background. We've understood the overview. We've understood the blueprint and some significant places in the book of Numbers. So it's going to really help us now as we journey through these 36 chapters. And of course, I'm expecting you to be reading them at home with me as we journey through them. We're going to be able to unpack a lot of things, right? Hopefully it doesn't get us into too much controversy, but we'll see as we follow through the book of Numbers what we will be led to when it comes to the content that is here for us to digest. So thank you so much for being part of this study today. We continue in our next session, journeying through the book of Numbers. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the comments. Like I said, if you missed our previous studies, go back to our YouTube channel, check under the videos tab, rewatch our previous studies. If you just want to review something that you probably feel like you need to refresh your memory on, definitely do that. If you have not done it as yet, hit that share button, hit that subscribe button. Until we see again, do stay blessed and enjoy the rest of your night if you're viewing it at night, the rest of your day if you're viewing at day. God bless you.